It was supposed to be just another quiet morning in our peaceful neighborhood. Birds chirped over neatly trimmed lawns, sprinklers clicked in rhythm, and my wife Laura stood on our porch sipping coffee. She had that calm smile she always wore after watering her plants. We had moved into this HOA-controlled community a few years ago, hoping for peace after decades of service in the Navy. I was retired, with the kind of silence only a soldier learns to appreciate after years of chaos. But that peace didn't last long. The Homeowners Association had rules, unreasonable ones. They fined residents for flower pots too bright, for grass an inch too long, for cars parked slightly off-center. Still, Laura tried to play by their book. She smiled through their nonsense, paid the fines, and even volunteered for neighborhood events. She believed in kindness, until the day kindness was taken for weakness. It began with a letter taped to our door. Notice of violation. Laura frowned as she read it. The HOA claimed our small American flag, the one she'd placed in the garden to honor veterans on Memorial Day, was unauthorized decor. It was barely 2 feet tall, gently fluttering in the wind. I chuckled when she showed it to me, thinking it was a mistake. Don't worry, I told her. I'll talk to them. But Laura, ever the peacemaker, decided to handle it herself. She walked to the HOA office that afternoon with cookies and a smile. She came home 2 hours later, pale, shaken, and silent. When I asked what happened, she just said they yelled at me. Said I was disrespecting the rules. I clenched my jaw but said nothing. Years of discipline taught me that silence was sometimes stronger than anger. But that silence was tested the next morning. It was Saturday, just after sunrise. I was in the garage fixing my bike when I heard shouting from outside. Laura's voice. My heart froze. I ran out and saw 2 men, HOA enforcers, standing on our lawn. One was filming her with his phone, laughing, while the other was trying to yank the small flagpole out of the ground. Please stop, she cried. That's my husband's flag. He served this country. The man sneered. Then he should know the rules better. And then it happened. He shoved her shoulder hard enough for her to stumble backward onto the grass. My mind went blank. Years of training flooded back in an instant. My heartbeat slowed, my breathing steadied, and the world around me turned razor sharp. I didn't see 2 HOA workers anymore. I saw a threat. I walked toward them slowly, not saying a word. One of them turned and scoffed. You her husband? Teach your wife to follow the rules. The other laughed until I was close enough for him to see my eyes, calm, cold, and deadly still. The laughter stopped. Sir, this is a private matter, one stammered. Step back. I didn't. I simply said, You just assaulted my wife. The taller one puffed his chest. Assault? She's fine. Laura was trembling behind me, tears running down her face, clutching her arm. Apologize, I said quietly. Now, the man smirked. Or what, you gonna call the cops? He shouldn't have said that. In the Navy, we have a saying, never start a fight with a man who's already survived one. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, but every muscle in my body was coiled like a storm waiting to break. Before I could even respond, one of them reached toward me, trying to push me back. That was his mistake. In a split second, I grabbed his wrist, turned it, and pinned him down with one motion. Gentle enough not to break anything, firm enough to remind him what discipline feels like. The other man froze, holding his phone, whispering, What the hell? I looked straight into his eyes and said, Record this too. My voice was low, controlled. You touched a veteran's wife. You disrespected the flag. You broke the law. He started mumbling apologies, his camera shaking. I released the first guy and said, You've got 2 minutes to get off my property. Next time you deal with the police. They scrambled away without another word, leaving behind the trampled flowers and that little flag still standing in the dirt. Laura clung to me, whispering, I was so scared. I held her close and said, Not anymore. But the story didn't end there. The next week, we received a notice saying we had been fined $2,500 for physical aggression against HOA staff. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. Laura wanted to ignore it, but I knew better. You don't let bullies win, not in the neighborhood, not in the world. I gathered every recording, every letter, and every witness statement. Then I called a friend, an old Navy brother who had become a lawyer. Within days, he prepared a case. We filed a restraining order and a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and assault. When the hearing date came, half the neighborhood showed up. People who had also been bullied, fined, or silenced by the same HOA tyrants. I wasn't just fighting for my wife anymore. I was fighting for all of them. The courtroom was tense. The HOA president sat smirking with his lawyer, thinking their money and influence would silence justice. But when the video played, the footage their own man had filmed, everything changed. The entire courtroom watched as the enforcer shoved Laura and mocked her. Gasps echoed through the hall. The judge's gavel hit the desk sharply. "Enough," he said. "This court will not tolerate abuse under the disguise of authority." The HOA's lawyer stammered excuses, but the damage was done. We won the case. Not only were the fines dismissed, but the HOA was ordered to pay damages for emotional distress and public harassment. Laura cried in my arms that day, whispering, "I told you kindness matters." I smiled and said, "And sometimes, kindness needs a backbone." After the verdict, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had avoided us out of fear started coming forward. They shared their own stories, threats, fines, and intimidation from the same enforcers. Together, we held a community meeting and voted to dissolve the old HOA board completely. By unanimous decision, we replaced them with decent, fair residents who cared more about people than power. For the first time in years, kids played freely in the park again. Flags waved proudly on porches without fear of fines. And every morning, Laura's laughter returned to our home. Peace was back, not because it was given, but because it was earned. One evening, while I was sitting on the porch, the sun sinking behind the rooftops, I saw those two enforcers again. They drove by slowly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. I didn't hate them, not anymore. Life had already taught them the price of arrogance. Instead, I raised my cup of coffee slightly in their direction, a silent reminder. Respect is learned, not demanded. Laura joined me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You think they'll ever change?" she asked softly. I smiled. "Maybe. People either learn from fear or from forgiveness. I just hope they choose the right one." Months later, the local news did a story about our neighborhood, about how a small act of defiance changed everything. The headline read, "Retired Navy SEAL restores honor in HOA terrorized community." I didn't do it for fame or revenge. I did it because no one should feel unsafe in their own home, especially someone like Laura, whose only crime was kindness. As the reporter asked me for a final quote, I looked at the flag waving in our yard and said, "That flag has seen war, loss, and sacrifice. It deserves respect, and so does everyone who lives under it." The camera zoomed in on the flag as the wind carried it high, proud and free, just like the justice we finally reclaimed. After the courtroom battle ended, peace slowly began to return, but victory didn't come quietly. Word of what had happened spread faster than we expected. The local paper ran a front-page story about the Navy SEAL who took down a corrupt HOA. Overnight, our quiet neighborhood became the center of attention. Reporters parked outside our gate, neighbors peeked curiously from behind curtains, and strangers left letters on our porch thanking us for standing up to bullies in power. At first, it was overwhelming, especially for Laura, who wasn't used to attention. But I told her, this isn't just our story anymore. It's a reminder that silence gives power to the wrong people. That week, we started receiving calls from other homeowners across the state, veterans, teachers, single mothers, all sharing their own stories of abuse from HOA boards. What began as one couple's fight was turning into a movement. Laura suggested organizing a community alliance, something to help people stand up for themselves legally and emotionally. I loved the idea. We called it Homeowners for Honor, a group dedicated to protecting residents' rights and ensuring no one else faced what we did. The first meeting was small, held in our backyard under soft string lights and the smell of Laura's homemade cookies. By the third week, there were dozens of people, each bringing documents, evidence, and stories that mirrored ours. We realized how widespread the problem was, not just in our town, but everywhere. Some cried while sharing their experiences, some were angry, but all were relieved to finally be heard. As I watched Laura gently comfort an elderly woman whose home had been threatened over a non-compliant fence color, I realized my wife's kindness wasn't weakness. It was her strength. One day, a news crew from a national network arrived to fill